So we're going to get started. Okay, so we're going to get started in this workshop, and we're going to start with the most basic of functions in GT, which is the GT function. So in this, one RMD file, we're going to look through just a few functions. Again, GT, another function called GT preview, which is just basically like getting a small version of a table. It's kind of like Glimpse, but the table version of it. And GT save, because right away we want to show you how to export things, even if you just get a most basic of tables in your viewer. So let's start with the GT function. So with all these RMDs, what I've done is just like give you the signature for every single function here. And so here we have data. That'll be our incoming data frame or tibble. And we can do a few different things, and we'll show you exactly what's being done in each of these.
Hey, Rich, I hate to stop you, man. I've got to, I think we need to make the workshop an assignment. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to kick you out. Just sit back and relax for 2 seconds here.
Okay. No problem.
Let me make sure that this is going.
Okay, I'll reconnect.
All right, let me just double check. Okay, yes, you should be able to now. Okay, I should have been able to tell by the flood of messages that something was not happening. So we just made it so that the project is available to everyone. In addition to that, you should now see the assignment or start button. I'm sorry about that. If you go and you click back on your projects page or the project tab at the top, you should now be able to see this. We created a new space last night and we forgot to set up the project as an assignment. So you should see now, if you go into the project space, you should be able to see that. So,
okay, thanks. Thanks, Bill. Okay, so we're gonna start with the GT function. That allows you to create a GT table object. So yeah, it's basically the first thing you use. And just to, throughout the workshop, we'll use a bunch of the different data sets available in GT. And there's 5 of them. Since the beginning, these 5 data sets have been in GT. So we use Exhibit a lot because it's a very small data set. It's kind of like fake data just to play with a few rows, a few columns. So let's take a look at that data set. So just right here in the inline viewer, we can see that, yeah, it's just like 8 rows, 9 columns. But it's got lots of different data types, and we can play around with different functions in GT to sort of like, figure out how it works. So let's do the first thing, introduce Exhibit to the GT function. We just pipe it in. And there we go. Now we have a table of Exhibit, which is great. So this is basically unformatted, the most basic table you can get. It's just like every other table making our package, you just have one entry function, which is, sometimes the name of the package. So we can modify the layout a bit, add a bit of structure. So you may have noticed we have like a row column and a group column. It's not by accident. We can actually have like a stub on the left side, basically the row labels. And we can also have rows ordered into groups. So that's why you have this group column here. So let's make a stub. And we can do that with the row name call argument. We just pass in the name of the column that will be used in the stub. And basically, the row names, they just get shoved into the left side right here and a little bit subdivided. And that is basically row labels or a stub in GT. So yeah, row name call will do that as long as you have a column that has the row names. So it doesn't have a column label above it. That's what it says here. And that's what you see. It's basically, you can put stuff in there. It's got a separate function for that. But by default, it kind of has nothing, because like it can mean like, you're talking about this stub, or you're talking a bit about the columns. It's really up to you, but that's a later thing. We'll get into that later. The more fun thing is using row name call with group name call. And we have, a row column and a group column. Let's try those together. And best way to explain it is just to show it. So basically what happens is now we have a series of rows in a row group, like 2 row groups, actually. One named group underscore A, group underscore B, and that came from these labels right here. Great. So what it does is, even if these are out of order, it'll gather the different rows into the groups that you specified. Here's a bit of proof of that. It's kind of silly, but just want to convince you that even if you have like, groups all sort of, randomized here, if you use GT row name and group name call, well, mostly group name call, you'll see that these get put into two different groups and they're, separate. The order is maintained, but at least they're, not multiple groups with the same name. Okay. Here's a weird one. Say you have like a data frame with row names, like actual row names in R. Like empty cars has this. If you just look at empty cars in the console, a little small console there, make this a little bigger. These right here on the left side, that's not a column, that's just row names. Okay. So, it's not very common, but if you do, you can use those row names and put them in the stub. There's an argument here just for that. So we'll use empty cars, row names to stub equals true. And we're just using those row names, putting them in the stub. So there's a thing for that in GT, just in case. But if you're into dplyr, and this is the thing about row groups, you can have a groups tibble and you can pass out right into GT. So you don't see anything here. I mean, you see groups equals group 2. But if you pass it into GT, you can use that to specify the groups, which is kind of neat. I mean, you might forget about it, but it's there in case you need it. The real power of that is if you have multiple groups and they collapse into like these combined groups. The best way is to kind of show you. So we have this giant data set here called Pizza Place. It's nearly 50,000 rows. Let's filter it just a bit so it has less rows. And then we'll do a group by type and size. Great. Now we're going to make it even smaller. So we only have a few items per group, a few rows per group. And now we can do this. Pipe it right into GT. This thing right here, because these groups are collapsed, sort of like combined together, there's not multiple levels of groups, but just like combined groups. You can specify a separator here with this weird option. But it just means that your group names will be sort of like, together and separated by whatever you put here, which is kind of cool. So that's what you can do with grouped data in GT. You just pass it right in and you get what you want. Okay, so that's all about GT. There's a few more things, but I don't want to get into too many details with just the GT function. Basically, it's an entry point. You have your data and you want to get into GT, then you want to do more stuff. So Shannon's asking if there's a publicly available repo with these materials. There is. It's in one of my private repositories in my account. I think it's called GT Workshop, or I'm hoping you can just search for it, but it's there. And all these materials are there and up to date. It's exactly the same. That's where I drive these materials from.
I'll find it. It's under your GitHub account, Rich?
Yeah, somewhere.
Okay,
like,
I'll add it to the Zoom chat.
Thanks. I should have came with that prepared because, it's good to have all that stuff. But no matter, let's get on to GT preview. So this is just a function. It's a kind of like almost like a throwaway function because like you're not going to do much else beyond GT preview. You're not going to continue the pipe. You're not going to do more. Basically, you're just going to like preview the data with this GT preview function. And by default, you're showing the top 5 rows, the bottom, the last row. You can change these obviously. You're going to see the row numbers. And then what happens is any data in between, like the head and tail, are just shown as like an ellipsis. Like you see which row numbers are part of like the middle part you're not seeing. It gives you a sense of like how many rows you have, what's the top and the bottom, and let's just have a look at it. So GT cars, it's another data set that's in GT. Yeah, it's kind of big, 47 rows, bigger than Exhibit for sure. We're going to choose just a few columns of that. And then we're going to send that to GT preview. And you get this little sort of like preview table. Again, it's kind of like Glimpse. You get a small little view of your data. You see the last thing, a few of the first few items, and then stuff in between. You sort of get a sense of how much data there is. And that's about it for GT preview. I mean, there's some options, like I said, you can get rid of the row numbers so you don't see what's in this ellipsis, but That's pretty much it. It's useful if you need it, and if you don't, it's probably fine too. Okay, here's a weird thing. We're going to get into saving GT tables like right away before we get into like more complicated GT tables, because it's good to know how to like export these things, because that's what this is all about. You're going to use those tables. One hopes. So we got this GT table. It's just this. So GT save does all of the exporting. So here's a weird one. When you save something, you want to choose the extension of like the file you want to make. So this recognizes what file type you want it to be in. So if you have like a name which ends in .html, you're going to save it as HTML. There's another option here called inline CSS. But by default, that is true. And what that means is it's kind of a esoteric thing. But essentially, if you're going to use like Blastula, or you want to email a table, you have to set this to true, because HTML style sheets, they don't, email doesn't like that. It wants all these styles to be like with the elements of like, the thing, the HTML essentially. So you have to choose this as true, make this object. And then if you're using Blastula, you can include that. That's a whole other workshop, but there's an example actually buried somewhere in GT's repo in the manual examples, showing you how to use tables in a Blastula email. And there's even like a workshop for this. And there's also Connect if you want to go it that way, but you can do it without Connect as well, just with this trick. Okay, so if you leave out the inline CSS option, you get a more conventional HTML file with embedded CSS styles. This is pretty useful if you have some other venue for HTML that you want to take this table to, and you're not using, say, R Markdown or anything else for that. If you want an RTF file, you just name the file ending in .rtf, and you get a file which is standalone. It can be opened in Word. I have them right here. I made all these files right here in this root folder. So all these files here are right here. So we can have a look at this right here. We can say, this may or may not work, depending on, downloads from this are kind of funky, but this file, if you were to open up in Word properly and download it properly, it would open up in Word, this RTF file. And I think PNG files work fine because they just open up in a separate tab. So that's basically saving the GT table as a image, which sometimes you want, most of the time you don't. That's kind of like, like the last resort if you can't show things, if there's an image. Unfortunately, there's a question here. Is it possible to export into some kind of formatted Excel table? Not at the moment. We're perpetually working on formatters, not formatters, like output formats for GT. And actually, that'll be the subject of like the keynote, which is on Tuesday, talking about our efforts to get better at exporting in all these different output types. Because, well, RTF, HTML, and LaTeX, they're good, but we definitely need more. We need more breadth of output types in GT.
Hey, Rich, somebody asked about PDF. Did you see that one by chance?
Yeah, and by PDF, do they mean LaTeX? And if they mean LaTeX, then yes. If you want like an actual PDF of the HTML table, like just like the, you can do that too. You can actually type in PDF here, which is, and then you should be able to get a PDF file, like however many pages that your table occupies in a PDF file. And unfortunately, you can't change the page size, and it doesn't crop to like the table.
The only other question is someone was getting an error about cohersing a class function to a data frame. Wasn't sure if you knew about that one off the top of your head. If not, no big.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, it was a little bit ways up there. That's why I was checking.
Yeah, I do see that. Yeah, that seems like just an error that someone made. I'm hoping I see string of factors in there. Yeah, some problem like making the data frame work. Sorry, hope you figure that out, because I can't see your console or your work session, but use one of these examples if you can, like just example
Yeah.
then you might be, hopefully you're golden after that. Okay, so that is all about using the GT function, GT preview, and GT save to do lots of things, very intro things. Definitely open up for any more questions. Let's see, I have a question here. Are any of these compatible with use in the officer package, preferably beyond PNG? I think not really. I mean, there's ways to, in GT summary, to convert a GT table and other table types into other formats, which could be used in Officer. My recommendation is to look at the README for the GT summary package, which is on GitHub. And there's a table at the very bottom. And I think there's some mention of like how to convert tables from one format to another. And I'm pretty sure they preserve some styles. And if not, you can create the styles in that other package once it's converted. Okay, great, awesome. Okay, so I'll move on to part 2. This first part was pretty basic, pretty small, but you gotta start somewhere. So that was that. So now we're gonna talk about adding or modifying parts of a table. So building up a table, adding all the parts you need, and definitely make a table that is going to be more functional in whatever you're using the table in. So these are all the tab underscore functions in GT. So in this module, there's going to be all of these right here. And essentially what you're doing with both of these is you're adding a new part to the table, like tab header. You're going to add a header, which basically is a title and possibly a subtitle as well. Stubhead is you're actually manually adding the stubhead to the left. So there's a function. Oh, sorry. This is actually that little label in the top left above the stub. Tab spanner is about adding spanner column labels, which are like labels above your column labels. So we'll get to that. Tabrowgroup is about manually adding row groups. So if you don't want to use like GT group call, you can use this to manually add them and have finer control if you like. Tab source note is about adding like footnotes, but they're just source notes. They don't refer to any one part of the table. Footnotes do. They attach a glyph to some cell in the table, and they have a referential note at the bottom. Tab style is all about styling different parts of your table. That's like everything. Like it could be like the footer, it could be the header, it could be like the stub, body cells. Tab style can do that. Tab options is just this monster function which has tons and tons of options, and you can do, if you can find the option, you can change the look pretty simply without using styles in most cases. And okay, so these are the main functions in this module. There's lots of helper functions and things like that. Like these are like the tie select dplyr functions that we use for selecting columns. There's helpers for transforming text. So you want to declare some bit of text as markdown text. You can do that with this MD function. HTML, if you want to include some raw HTML, that's not, you can include it in some cell or in the title, you can do that with this. And then there's these helpers for targeting locations. We'll get into that later. They all start with cells. And for defining styles, unfortunately, it just starts with cell singular, but there's only a few of those. Okay, a lot of stuff, but we'll see how this works together. And these are only used in a few functions. Some of these are pretty simple, but tab style, tab footnote are less simple. Okay, so table header. We can add a table header to a GT table with a title and even a subtitle. So this is optional. You don't start with one, but you can make one. So we have this table right here. I'm just going to show you the table before adding a header. So just this cut down version of GT cars. So let's use tab header. We'll add a title and a subtitle. We'll say this is markdown text. We're going to include some markdown stuff in here, like bold and code font. So let's do that. Great. So I'm just go up a little bit here. Great. So I did that. So we have the bold and we have the code font that was marked off by these backticks. So that's great. So that's how you add a header. And really that's it. for this function. If you don't have this and you have Markdown, it will just appear as it is, literally like this. So MD is important. Okay, tab stubhead, add label text to the stubhead. So you have a stub. You may introduce it with this row name call argument in GT. So the stub's there. There's no text there, but you want text there. Let's use tab stubhead. Okay, so now we include car, and it's there. And again, as before, we can do MD and do some, markdowny stuff. There we go. Sorry, it always appears off the page, but there we go. Car is now in this code font. Or, we can do any sort of like markdown thing, and it works. Great, and that's all there is to tab stubhead. Okay, we'll get into the more complicated stuff, I promise you, but those are the two simplest functions of these types. Tab spanner, that's a bit more involved. So this is where we add a spanner column label above certain columns. Okay, and it has a few more arguments. Okay, but we'll get into those. So what we can do here is, say we have GT cars and we just want a few columns. Let's start with a cut down version of GT cars. We'll make that a small version, which is this, 8 rows. Great. So let's take a look at that in GT. Just so we
There are some questions about compatibility with other packages such as Office R and Flex Table.
Yeah. So what I mentioned before is that you could convert a GT table object into one of those other objects with functions in the GT summary package. Let me just see if I can install that quickly. It may not be easy, but I want to see that at least the functions are there. So while it's installing, I will continue with this and I'll get back to that and see the functions in there. So getting back to this, we have this table and now we want to add some spanners. So let's add the spanner performance above, all these columns here. Okay. So we just need a label right there and the column names. Great. So now performance is above those columns, which is great. And currently GT only has like one row that you can specify above as spanners. We hope to, make that better by having spanners above spanners. But we still have to solve the API problem of that, how to define that and make that simple, which is why it's not currently in there right now. But yeah, nonetheless, we do have performance above all these things, these columns that we specified. And of course, that's a bit cumbersome. We can use tie select statements inside a C to get the same columns. So columns that start with HP, start with TRQ, start with MPG. It's about the same amount of typing, but you can sort of see that's flexible in that way, that you can, choose columns in this way with tie select. Okay, let's go look at the, one sec here, packages, GT summary. Okay. One sec. I believe there is a bunch of as functions.
Rich, is this to answer the question about exporting into a Excel table?
Not Excel table, but officer and I believe flex table.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah. So I believe you can take a GT object, which is what GT summary uses. It's kind of strange if you use a different package to do this, but I would give this a shot and just take a GT object and use as flex table. And I heard it works. No firsthand knowledge, but it might work today is what I'm saying in GT summary or via GT summary. Okay.
Someone also asked if it's possible to export to an Excel table from GT.
Yeah, sorry, currently not. But we made some inroads in like exporting as at least the Word format in a branch of GT. It's it wasn't made real public, but it's not bad. But again, it's not Excel, but essentially we're on that path, I guess, of going towards all the different Office applications. because they all use the same OOXML way of like representing, the documents. I think we have it for Word right now, and it works really well. It's not really well known or well publicized, but it's there in a branch of GT. If you're really looking for it, you can use DevTools to get that branch of GT on your system and try that out.
The next question is kind of related to that. Someone says, can GT be used within Shiny? And I think what people might be trying to envision is like a table in a Shiny app or on a HTML page, and then sometimes you can like right click to Excel. I think that's what they're.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of like connecting the different pieces together.
Yeah.
You can use GT and Shiny, and certainly there's like the Shiny functions in here to get that in there. Whether it doesn't have things like pagination or things you may expect in interactive tables. So that may be a bit cumbersome. You have to do some extra programming around that to sort of like generate your tables, without pagination, essentially. I hope that helps. I've seen a few Shiny applications with GT tables. They look pretty good, so it's definitely possible. It just doesn't, it's different because it doesn't have things like pagination like most things, like most table packages that are used in Shiny. Okay, so I want to talk about, what happens if you relocate certain columns like far away from each other. So say we have HP over here, but it's far away from all these other columns, which are going to be grouped under a spanner. That is totally not a problem. Basically, you can run this tab spanner, the same thing, and it will gather the columns to the far right where the first column is for that group under the spanner. And that's because there's an argument called gather, and the default is true. And you can certainly like disable this. There's certain situations where you might want this, but it's pretty rare. That's why the default is true. But if you do it as false, you see we have the same spanner over the two different groups, which are not contiguous with each other. But by default, that is true. It'll gather the columns together for you. Okay. So we can have two row groups. Let's see here. Okay. Now we're on to the next function, tab row group. I'm going to make the space just a little bit bigger. And so let's take a look at what this function does. Tab row group, it allows you to create a row group with a collection of rows. So this requires some specification of the rows that you're going to include in the group. So you can either supply row labels, row indices, or through the use of helper functions like starts with. So you can actually use those helper functions that are usually used for columns, but for rows, but it only works if you have row labels. So let's take a look at that. Say we have this table right here. So we have row labels because they're in the stub. So, we can think of them almost like columns in a way for selecting. So we can use the matches select helper function to match the rows which have some numbers at the beginning. Basically all these 458s and this 488. So let's make a row group called numbered, and we'll gather those rows together. So that's what it does. Now we have a row group called numbered. It's got all these rows. We now have an unnamed row group here. That's why there's a double line here. This doesn't have a name, but we can change that. We can call tab row group twice. So in this case, what we're doing is we're selecting some rows where the cars have an HP lower than 600, and the ones which they're greater than 600, and it gets all the rows. So making two row groups. So let's just run this before and after. Okay, so that's before. We're going to add the two row groups. There we go. So we made these row groups manually. You can definitely have a column which has like row group, super powerful all the way down, and powerful, for these rows. But there's another way if you want to manually specify if you just don't have that like available in the table for whatever reason. Okay, so that's tab row group. But say you're not satisfied with the ordering of the row groups. Of course, you can change the order in which you call this. Or you can just use this other function, which is not very well known, but maybe should be, only if you use these functions, row group order, and you just take your groups and you specify the order right there. So in this case, we want to have them in a different order. Okay, you may have noticed another weird thing I did. Instead of saying super powerful, I just put SP. You can define a short ID right here that we don't have to type out a bunch of like markdown or some other markup you may have in a complicated label. By default, labels become IDs, but if if your labels are very complicated, you might want to specify the ID, and you can use that both in this function and also other functions that that use IDs. And we'll get to that a little bit later. It's things like styling. So great. So that's that. Now we're going to talk about the footer section and how we can add notes in there.
Hey,
So
Rich,
tab source.
You got a few questions. Just let me know if you want to tackle them in between or at the end. Just let me know.
I will take a look at actually. So these tables can be modified in Word. I mean, if you have an RTF file, certainly, yeah. You just you export the RTF file, you import that into Word. You have the table. It's already going to be formatted, and you can modify that. I mean, it's not going to be an image. It's going to be a real table in Word. So that helps that. And if you want to be intrepid and get that branch of GT that has like the word output, which works inside of R Markdown, you do it that way too, but you'll probably have just as easy a time using the RTF output for that.
Rich,
Eric has some difficulties.
Do you mind showing us the function in the dev branch you were talking about a few minutes ago?
Yeah, certainly. Sorry about that. It's kind of like a mystery. Yeah, let's take a look there.
Somebody was asking about it. I went there and tried to dig around in your code. I was like, I'm just going to ask the developer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right here. So yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I apologize that it's so mysterious. So you have to go into branches. It's not even a PR. So you have to go into branches itself at the top here. And essentially it's this w-tbl-exp. So if we go here, well, it's not even, yeah, essentially it's this. And go to it, you'll, what you got tools, install GitHub, and then use at the end, and then essentially use the name of that branch. I'm not going to run it obviously here in the session, but it'd be something like this if I were to type it out. And so it's in C library, DevTools. No. Okay, so we're not going to do that. But okay, it's really DevTools. Install GitHub. And it's going to be RStudio, GT. And I believe it's going to be, what's the name of that again? It's going to be w-tbl-exp. Yes. I believe if you do that, this incantation right here, you will install that version, that branch of GT.
You mind pasting that in the chat box by chance? It's okay.
Yeah. And yeah, please verify this because
yeah. I think
I have it right. But who knows?
My hunch is that people love to take a look at what you have in development and maybe give advice. Like last year is my guts tell me that's not there yet for this. Or would you prefer if people go and make an issue or
yeah. I would like that actually. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
I tested it out personally, and it works really well, just as well as RTF. And but you have to use it within, and maybe we're getting to the weeds a bit here, but it's okay. If you do new file R Markdown, you have to choose like Word output format for that. And once you do that and have a document there, then you can like create the tables inside of a chunk. And it will create the table inside, that Word document that you get out when you render or knit.
So if I had to help summarize here, just for the people that are newer to GT, GT today out of the box supports HTML, it supports RTF. Is this to help support Word at some point in the future?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
Basically, in the future, we want to, we did a lot of stuff with the API. We were concentrating on that pretty heavily. But now we want to do stuff at the back end, which is, like creating more output formats, creating them better, having more styles. And I think we identified at least 6 or 7 that Office formats, the ones we already have, that are the focus areas.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. And let's see here. Any more?
Yeah, there's
any helper functions in GT package for working with table by from the Arsenal package? Currently, no. That's definitely an area for improvement because the Arsenal package is quite good. Definitely post an issue about that in the GT issues, or start a discussion in discussions area of GT of that repo. Definitely up for talking more about how we can improve GT. What does GT stand for? I don't know. It's wherever you want it to be. I guess it could be a grammar tables, which doesn't really exist as a thing. It could be great tables. When I came with it, I just wanted a short name. But I think it's big grammar of tables unofficially, even though I never say that. It's just GT. I don't know.
Yeah, I like it. Leave it up to the user to decide.
Yeah, you can interpret.
It's like the ending of a movie. Who knows where?
That's right.
Like what did he say at the end of Lost in Translation? Well, we'll never know.
We'll never know. Yeah, till the sequel, which will never happen. Okay. Anyways, so example, we're going to add a source node to that table. Okay. So again, the simplest table you can make in this is right here, just with GT. But you want to know at the bottom. We want to have this node. The example data set is available in the GT package, and we want to make that render as with Markdown. So we can do that just with tab source node. So we'll run this. Got to scroll down, and down here, there we go. Source node is at the bottom. Sorry about this. I'm having some pain issues here. There we go. So that's adding a source node. If you want multiple source nodes, you would have to call tab source node multiple times, which is not bad. But the order you call it in is the order you get the nodes. Great. So if you want something a little more advanced, but still a note, but a note that refers to something in the table, you can use tab footnote. So this is great. So it's a bit more complicated in that it has the footnote, which is the text, but also a locations argument, which is important. And that really is how you select where you want the reference of the footnote to be applied to. So they'll attach a glyph, like a 1, 2, 3 or something like that, or a symbol or a letter in the right order, depending on where it is. Okay, so we have to use these cells underscore functions to target different parts of the table. So in order from top to bottom, it's cells title to target the title or subtitle, cells stubhead to target the stubhead cell. It's a single function. The cells column spanners to target the column spanners, the labels with cells column labels. If you want to target the row groups, like the labels in the row groups, you would use cells row groups. Targeting cells in the table stub is done with cells underscore stub. In the body, which is basically all the data, it's going to be cells underscore body. If you want to target things like the summary cells, which we haven't gotten into yet, you do that with cells summary and cells grand summary. And we'll see examples of that much later in this workshop. If you want to target multiple disparate locations, you can enclose several cells calls within a list. Okay. It's a lot of stuff, but we're going to get through this. So we got this example table again, and we want to target a note on this cell, banana. Okay, so we'll say in the footnote, this is a banana, but to target the actual cell, we would use the interface of cell's body, and it takes 2 arguments, columns, rows, and we want the intersection of those 2 things to specify which column we want. So the column is char. And the row is the row where char equals banana or is banana. And that's how you get that. You can also use rows equals 2, but this is a way of sort of getting it exact if you know the exact, label for it. So if we do this, we get right here, 1, this is banana, and the 1 appears right there. Perfect, that's what we wanted. So that's how you add a footnote to a body cell in a table. So I got a question here, is Zibble different from a table? No, it's just a sort of a jokey sort of like name for data set. It's example tibble. It's not a new data set. That's not a new data type. It's just a weird name. So that's my only example here for tab footnote. So if for some weird reason you wanted to have all of the cells in the body, in the char column, having that note, you can do this. And then you get ones all the way down. Okay. So it's flexible here. You can choose either one of columns, rows. You can choose none and just have everything in the body have that note. Like that. I mean, that's useful for things like if you want to do styling and you want every cell in your body to have a background color. For footnotes, not so useful, but that's how cell's body works. Okay, tab style. So we want to add custom styles to one of our cells. So kind of the same as tab footnote. We have locations, but instead of footnote, obviously we have something called style, and style takes itself a helper function. It can either be cell text for text properties, fill properties with cell fill, border properties with cell borders. And just like you can enclose different locations in a list, you can enclose different styles in a list here. So you can have like a mix of different, say text styles and fill styles in a list, and you can have a bunch of different locations in one call of tab style. Okay, so let's do one thing where we change the font of all body cells in the exhibit table to Times New Roman. This is a font that's on your computer. May or may not be there. It's going to be there. So we got a question here. Oh, no questions. Great, just discussion. So let's have exhibit, and we'll put that into GT with just 2 columns, num and currency. Great. So now we want to do a thing where we say the font is going to be Times New Roman. So we did with cell text. There's an argument in there. Had to search through it. There's a bunch of options in there. The only one is font. And in this case, we want to do cells body and cells column labels. So basically change everything that we see in this table to be Times New Roman. And it worked. That's totally Times New Roman if you look at it. So again, you can put these all on a list. You can get rid of that. And now it's just going to be the column labels. And that's the same as this, just not having a list. Like that. Okay. And you can do a thing where you can have multiple fonts in here. Say you don't have Times New Roman, you could choose like another font like Menlo. This probably won't work here actually, because we're on a different system, Ubuntu on cloud. We could do, as for sake of example, we could say don't have. It'll basically skip over the thing that's not there and then go to the next one, which is there, Times New Roman. So that's like a font fallback list, as it were. Great, just gonna put that back. Okay, so that's that. We can also go a little crazy and choose a font from the Google Font Service by using the Google Font function. You sort of use this as the value to font, and then you choose from one of over 1,000 different fonts they have there, and you can specify a weight. And a lot of the fonts they have there have these numbered weights. 400 is usually normal. Anything higher than that is bolder or heavier. Anything lighter is going to be like less than 400 typically. So let's do this just to show you that. So this is IBM Plex fonts. And again, let me just show you these weights here because it's kind of interesting. So that's becoming lighter and lighter. And if you want something that's super bold, you would do something like 800. And there you are. So we're just choosing cells body to have that bit of styling applied. Great.
Rich, we've got some questions if you want to tackle.
Yeah, certainly.
I'll try to help you through some of them. If you want to start at the bottom and work your way up, that's fine. But one person says, can we predefine all of the font options and call them later in the program?
Not currently. There's no top level options for defining fonts, unfortunately.
Next one, I think.
Yeah, getting all the available installed fonts in a specific system. There's certain R packages for doing that. I think like extra font will do that. There's a few more that I'm probably not getting. I recall there's just quite a few. Like they all have font in the package name. Google Fonts is not a package that needs to be installed. This is basically working through the internet. So if you're offline, this probably will not work. So to guard against that, you might want to do something like have a bunch of fallbacks, like, having something like Helvetica on your own system there. And then maybe like, that sort of thing. But basically this is working just by calling out to the Google Font service and making a certain CSS.
I think at the heart of it, Rich, people are trying to figure out, is there a way to figure out what fonts are available to them?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, on your own system, I would look, depending on your system, there's usually some utility to look through fonts. On the Mac, it's Font Book. On Windows, it's something else, which I'm not sure of. In terms of R packages, there's a few that help you really narrow it down and give you like the exact names you need. Like even the R compatible names, because some things have spaces and things like that. In terms of Google Fonts, there's a Google Fonts website where you can sort of look around at all the different fonts and preview them and see the different weights and see which one works nicely for you. That's about all the guidance I have. Basically, what I'm saying is like, these are your system fonts. It's good to specify a few of them in case you're working on different systems. This is kind of like an internet font. So that'll work kind of like anywhere.
One requires the internet, the other doesn't, basically.
Yeah, one requires your system, which may not be always the same if you're moving files around or sharing them.
And so somebody also says, are there alternative symbols to use for tagging a cell?
Not sure really what that means.
Are there alternative symbols to use for tagging a cell? I'm not sure what that means either, but if you want to post more about it, we can tackle it, but I'm not sure either. Just trying to see if there's anything else here before we move on, I think.
So there's an example here, just to me, something like this, where cells body columns equals everything and rows equals cur column less than 10. Right now, cur column is not really a thing. You have to specify the exact column name. There's no concept of a current column, but you can do columns everything and use like these. You can use like expressions like that to get rows. Can you use an asterisk, for example? Oh yes, and footnotes. Yeah, absolutely, you can. Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit later in tab options, which I think is actually coming right next.
Perfect.
But you can definitely change like the footnote glyphs which are attached to table cells. And hopefully that's just below.
Do line breaks work, Rich, with the MD function as well as HTML function, or is it just MD? Do you know?
They do. Lots of different ways, actually. You can do things like BR, because MD will accept some HTML. Maybe we should prove that, because we're here in a workshop. So let's see here. So
I think somebody mentioned they were having some trouble getting this to work, so I was just gonna.
Yeah, let's make that work. It is yellow. Okay, let's see if this works. Oh, okay, good, it works. So That is good. So you can use BR. You just have to make sure this is labeled as Markdown. Some things that probably won't work are this. This may or may not work. Yeah, see that maybe you might run into trouble if you do things like this line break right here. It's so strange that it doesn't work. Usually you would expect this would be just fine, but it does not work. But BR definitely does work. Yeah. Hopefully that helps. Anywhere you insert text with Markdown, that's lots of ways. You're basically creating new text. You can use BR. And then MD will make it work. Otherwise, it's not interpreted as, a line break. It's just literal text.
One last question here, and then we'll move on and then come back to him. It says, can you display the location with other symbols than numbers? Does that make sense to you, Rich?
Oh, yeah. Can you access location?
Not sure. Pierre asked, can you display the location with other symbols than numbers? I thought maybe.
If I'm thinking it's footnotes, yeah, then you can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Great.
All right.
Okay. I'm going to move on a bit, and I think we'll get to that really soon. There's a few more examples which are a bit overwrought, but I want to show them to you because it shows what we can do with tab style. So here's a table. I have to scroll around a bit here. Sorry about that, but it's got to be done. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to take number values which are greater than 5,000 in that column and fill the cells with cyan and make the text bold. So I'll show you just that by ending right there. Because it's good to see it's for one step at a time. Yeah, it's bold, backgrounds change. Awesome. And now we're taking a different column, currency, and find those values in currency which are less than 100. And there are a few. And we're going to make the fill some other color. This is just showing that you can use like these hex colors and making the style of the text italic. So let's run this whole thing. I don't think that took, so I'll try it again. Oh, having some serious trouble here. So I'm going to just run this whole thing like this. There we go. Great. So yeah, change the color background using a hex color and made the values in italics. That's pretty cool. Good. So that's tab style. There's more. There's way more. This is just another example. I won't get into the details of this because you're gonna move on. But what I'm trying to do here, this is like some finance table, S&P 500. So basically what we're doing here is we're going to say which days were closed lower than open. We're going to make them red days and corresponding green days. So we're going to do that with tab style, where it close is greater than open and where open is greater than close. We're going to choose different colors. Not bad. The cool thing about this is that color, it can be defined as like this R color, like an X11 color name. It could be a hex color. It could be a CSS3 color. Lots of ways to define colors. So that's how you do that. So we're going to get past tab style. We'll see more of that later, but yeah, there's a whole world of options in tab style, style different parts of a table. Now tab options, this massive function with tons of arguments. They're hopefully simple to use, but there's lots of them. Like it's just like there's a ton. But searching is a bit easier because at least what we've done is we've separated the different parts of each of these arguments with dots and started with the general location or the whole thing that it modifies. So these table dot arguments, they modify the whole table. These ones just work in the headings. Column labels can be changed. So it's kind of like you can do this with tab style, but this does everything quickly with like one option. It just does all the locations. So that's what this does. And there is footnotes, marks. That's the thing we were looking for. Here we can change what footnote marks you use. It could be numbers, it could be letters. You just provide a vector of symbols you want to use in the order you want to use them. And then it'll use those. And there'll be the example of that coming up soon. Great. So This is actually an example of that, I think. Well, let's see, let's get tab 1. So basically what we're doing here is we're making a table, and we're going to use this in a bunch of examples with tab options. So let's take a look at this table. It's basically unstyled, but it's got a lot of structure. It's got a bunch of footnotes defined, and it's got some cells being formatted in different ways. Great. So what if we want a super wide table? We want it to span the entire content width area. We can use table width in tab options and use the percent helper function and say 100%. So we want it to be very wide as the table can be. There we go. That's a 100% wide table. Okay, here's another one. We want to change the table background color quite simply for the entire table to light cyan. We can do that here. It doesn't come across very well probably on Zoom, but that's a very light blue. Great. So footnote marks, we can change that to letters. And letters in this case is the vector of letters. So now we see instead of 1, 2, 3, we have A, B, and we see that at the bottom as well here, A and B. We can change that again to like something like this, star, oops, 2 stars. Now, if I run that, we get it like this. And at the bottom, we should see the same sort of thing. So I could supply a vector. Do that. I'm always doing these things in case people come back. They don't get the original. Okay, so we change the padding of data rows to 5 pixels with data row padding. This is kind of useful because you may not be satisfied with the how tall a table is, like it's maybe too tall. You can change it with data row padding. So now it's a bit more dense, there's less space between consecutive rows, which is pretty nice. We can make this even a bit smaller. There's going to be a limit typically, probably 0. But this is quite nice if you just want, just the table rows to be a bit, more compressed. Here's a nice one. We changed the heading size to these keywords like small. So let's try that. So now like this title is much smaller. We can also do things like X small. And these both be the same size. These are extra small. Yeah, and corresponding we can do large as well. Let's do this just for a bit of contrast. This is now extra large, this is extra small. And we can target the title and subtitle. Great. So summary of all this, we learned about headers could be added, source notes could be added, spanner column labels, placed above certain column labels with tab spanner. You have a stub, want to label it, use tab stubhead. You want footnotes, use tab footnote. Tab style is for adding styles, typically things like changing the text or the background, even adding borders. We didn't see examples of that, but you can change borders around certain cells. And all those options that affect the entire table, they're not targeted, can be used with tab options. So simple ways to radically change the look of the table.
Come on back and we'll get going with the next portion of the workshop.
Great.
All right, so 11:15, I'm going to kick back the recording, and Rich, it is all you here.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Bill. So for the next part of the workshop, we're going to focus a bit on these formatter functions that we have in GT. They all begin with FMT. In one case,
that was me. Sorry, just making sure. I thought I paused it. I guess I didn't. So anyway,
that's okay.
More breaks to edit.
Yeah.
All yours.
All right, awesome. So yeah, formatting functions. They let you do lots of things with cells you already have in GT, like in your GT table. So I'm going to go through quite a few of those. The very first one we begin with is format number. and it's very flexible, tons and tons of options. The key thing with these formatters is they allow you to express your numbers or even like your text or dates, times in ways that you really want them to be expressed. So we'll start with format number, and it has a range of options. And the key thing to recall here is that you want to pass in your GT table in each case. And you really do have to specify a column that you want to format. And then you can also specify which rows you want to format. By default, it's going to be every row in a particular column. But it could be like, certain rows. You can have expression here, or you can have like just indices, whichever ways you want to express rows, as we've done before, you can put them in here. Okay, so yeah, like I said, lots of control over numeric formatting with format number. For decimals, we can choose number of decimal places, option to drop the trailing zeros, choice if you want the decimal symbol or not. The grouping separators, typically they're commas or they're dots in every third figure. That's what this is. We can choose to actually scale values by some arbitrary value. We could do something called large number suffixing. So larger figures can automatically be collapsed and have a suffix attached to them. So that's auto scaling and decorating. We can apply any sort of arbitrary pattern around the formatted value. Say you want to have like, angle brackets around your formatted value, you can do that with the pattern. And also we have something called locale-based formatting. If you provide a locale ID, like say DE, it'll result in number formatting being specific to the chosen locale. So we'll go into that as we run through these examples. Okay, so let's do format number. So we'll keep it super simple, and we will just get, like one column of numbers. And these are basically lightly formatted numbers, but we're going to format it with format number. And by default, if you just have the column, the defaults are like 2 decimal places. We have commas as grouping separators, and that's about it. But we have options. So if you do the same thing again, we can choose to have no separators and have 3 decimal places. So let's take a look at that. There we go. So numbers to 3 decimal places, zeros whether we want them or not, and no grouping separators, like no commas. Okay. Like I said, if you just want to format some of the rows in a column, you could, do that with, indices, or in this case, we don't have row labels, so we have to use indices. So let's do the first 3 rows to 4 decimal places. Right there. See that right there? Great. Or if you, okay, in this case, we're using expression for rows. So we'll have this table here, instead of having just the num column, we'll have num and currency. In this case, we want to target the rows which have a currency value greater than 30, but we actually want to format the values in num. So we're specifying something based on another column right here. So let's run this. We can see right here, this has a currency greater than 30. So num was formatted to 4 decimal places. Same here, same here. This is not involved because it's NA, and these are not formatted right here because these are either NA or below 30. Great. So we can do many more things. We could do, so let's look at the table once more to see where we're starting from. Those are unformatted num column. So in this case, we want to target all values in the num column, which are greater than 500. We want to have the values with 1 decimal place. We want to scale it by 1,000, 1 over 1,000. So basically have 1,000th of each value. And we want to attach a K after the value. So we do this pattern. This curly braces and X will be the formatted number, and anything else you put around it will be the thing that just gets added. So that's the pattern. So I'll run that. There we go. So these are all above 500. And they're all scaled, so they're much smaller numbers, and they have this K to the right side. And the weird thing about this is not weird, but you can have multiple uses of X if you want. It's kind of strange, but you can put X in multiple times if you need it. Great. So that's that. So you can do scaling, use a pattern, and base your formatting on some condition. So there's a large table inside of GT called country pops. It is basically country populations going back to 1960. And I think it's up to 2015. But anyways, we have a lot of data. We're going to change things up to get like this table. Definitely not a tidy table, but it's good for display purposes for GT. So we're going to put that into GT. The problem is we have these giant numbers, which are not great to read. But we can do suffixing equals true. Let's try that out. And we want to use the columns 2 to 9. Great. So what this does is it does large number suffixing. So it scales numbers automatically and adds a symbol to the end. So, and we specify that to just 2 decimal places. We can definitely choose 1. And the numbers are even more compact right there. So numbers in billions here and in millions over here. Great. Sorry, I can't see any chat, so I'm going to put that on the screen. Perfect. Okay. So that's what we can do with format number. There's even more though. You can change the locale of numbers. So by default, the locale is EN, which is English. So we have that, but we can change that to a different locale. We can try FR for French, and that is French in France. That's the same as this. So you can have either this short locale code or this expanded one with the country. And that changes things up. Like the decimal is now a comma. And in this case, grouping separators are spaces. If we were to choose, say for instance, DE, it would be this, the period for spaces. I think DE, sorry, so Austria would be like this. And basically in this case, we have spaces for the grouping separators and commas for the decimal separators. So that is locale. By default it's this. And that's the same as this, just so you know. So I'll put back to this. Okay, so that's all about formatting numbers. You can also format as an integer. So kind of almost the same options, but slightly different because what you end up with is an integer. So there's gonna be some rounding involved. It does the rounding for you. But you still have things like step mark. We still have scaling. A lot of these options are still the same. They're pretty common, but there's some things which are not, a little bit subtly different, like things with decimals. It's not going to be there, so it's not in this function. So let's try taking this table, and we'll just use format integer, but the default options. So there we go. We get 0 to 33, 444. Basically, no decimal. They are integers. Great. That's kind of that. The only key thing to note here is that it does the rounding for you. So just be wary that it'll round in the way that R rounds on your system. Great. So if you need scientific notation, you can use the format scientific function. And again, many of the options are preserved from format number. Some of them are dropped because they're not for scientific notation. But it's remarkably the same. So let's give that a whirl. So again, I'm going to show you the before, which is this. So we'll take the num column. Any values that are less than 500, we'll put those in scientific notation. We'll use 1 decimal place. And there we are. So it's just these values right here because they fit our condition in the rows argument. Now, a good thing to note is 2.2, that fulfills the condition. It is preserved as 2.2 without this, without the times and then the exponent. This is because it would have an exponent of 0. So in scientific notation, you don't have to put that in. You just leave it as the figure itself. Great. So that's scientific notation. Something similar to scientific notation is engineering notation. It's kind of the same, except the exponent powers are in groups of 3 because they fit in with SI symbols. So they work really nicely with units. So that's format engineering. Many of the same, probably exactly the same options. So let's have an example of this. We'll just modify all the values in the num column. And we'll see here. Great. So you see these values here, they're always going to be like, these are between 1 and 1000. They would have like a 10 to the power of 0, which is not shown. So they're sort of like implicitly going to be that. So they're not in like this power notation. But otherwise, you see the powers here are in groups of 3 is -3, 3, 3, and 6. So next steps would be 9, 12, 15, so on and so forth. That's basically engineering notation. And the value here would be anywhere between 1 to 1000. Great. So that's engineering notation. Formatting like this allowed. Oh, unfortunately, we don't have like a very flexible formatter which takes a format string. But that is a great thing to include in GT. So either I'll make that issue, because it's been bouncing around my head to do that. Either, Carlos, if you want to make that issue yourself in GT, like the repo, or I'll remember to do that a bit later. But it'd be great if you did it, because then you can follow along and get that feature in. Okay, formatting %. Formatting values as a percentage. Okay, so we use this function, and it's got some options very similar to what we see before. A few different options just for like, placement of the %sign. But otherwise, it's kind of like pretty familiar. So let's generate this table before we actually call format %. So we have this column called frac of quota. It's a fraction of a quota for pizza sales. So they're hovering around 1, sometimes below. So we want that as a percentage. So we'll do that with format %. There we go. As you can see here, we have the values that are automatically scaled. They take fractional values and they make percentage values. But what you can do is, if you already have it as a percentage, like you just want to affix the %sign, you can just use, I have to find it here, scale values equals false for that. Say you already have like 105, 99, you would use that to false, like set that to false. Okay, so that's format %. Okay, format currency. Sometimes you have monetary values and you want to format them as currency values. So similar options, data, columns, rows. The fourth one is currency. So you provide a currency symbol, and GT will know how many decimal places the currency symbol has, what the glyph is, like what the symbol is. It'll basically do the right thing. You can choose to use subunits or not. It's basically like, cents. If you want cents on your dollars, you can say yes or no. The other options are very similar. There's a placement of your symbol. By default, it's left, but you can choose to have it right. You can choose to have a space between the currency symbol and the value. And again, there's other options which are similar, like in format number, like scaling, the marks, locale, all that. So let's take a look at example. It has a currency column right there. So let's use a currency symbol, euros, and we'll apply that to the currency column. And we'll see it right there. So you can choose. So if you don't know what currency symbols are what, and that's totally fine. I don't know most of them. There's actually a function in GT called info currencies. If you run that function, you get a table in your viewer. It appears, and you get all the currency codes. So you can express them as, currency codes, like with letters, 3 letters, or currency numbers, which have a variable amount of numbers in it. Usually the codes, the codes are the way to go. And this gives you an example of how it's going to look in your table. So that is how you find out about currency codes, in case you want to get something a bit more obscure. And there's actually, while we're on the topic, there's a bunch of these info functions. Just type in info, autocomplete, and you get a number of things. If you want to look at, say, certain Google fonts, and just get an example of what's available, you can sort of see them here, right there. Obviously, it's not all 1,000 or plus fonts. It's just a few of them, just to get your imagination going about what's available there. Okay, a little off topic, but I wanted to show you that at least. Okay, so that is format currency. So same sort of like options apply as I said before.
Rich, you want to tackle some questions by chance, or?
Yeah, certainly.
Awesome. So there's one here that says, can we define color style based on another column in the data set, but not displayed in the table? Is that?
Yeah, I answered that.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Earlier, maybe hang on a sec. I did. Yeah, so yeah, the style can be based on a column. You see the response at 11:11. There's a response there. Sometimes I send a response not to everybody.
Okay, perfect.
But in this case I did. In this case I sent to everybody.
Okay, awesome. It says, is the table width dynamic within RStudio? If I resize the window, does the table change? Did you answer that one?
No, I did not actually. So it's so you can set the table width to like some percentage, and that'll be a percentage of the width you have available. So if you have like the viewer, for instance, and you throw your table in there, let's take a look right now. Let's do example. Okay, let's just do this example GT. Okay, so if you stretch this out, it's basically like a certain width, but you can set the, it will sort of like at least collapse a bit. But you can set the width with that table width options in tab options.
All right.
Yeah, and if you go to like table, I believe it's dot width. Great. And you can put in like this 100%. Then definitely it'll track to like the width of the window. And certainly you can do, something like if it's too wide, you do 80%. And it'll still track, but it'll be 80% of the width, but centered.
Okay, well, fantastic. So next question, if the symbol is a special character, can we use ASCII code and footnote marks?
Oh, sorry. What's going on here? Let's see about that. So footnote marks, I mean, yeah, you can use all sorts of symbols that you can sort of express. So you can do tab options. I don't really have, let's see here if I can go back a bit. This would be it right here. So you can use all sorts of things. Let's put something in. Hopefully it's not going to appear though, because the editor is kind of bad. If you're able to stick a symbol in there, it would appear here. I just currently can't do it very easily because
yeah,
they don't appear in this editor. But if you're to stick, say, like a small circle, like some sort of glyph, so you got something like even emoji, it would work. It would pass through. So give you any special characters that you would normally get. Definitely not things like alt codes. It would have to be the character itself, just paste it into here. But it's possible.
Okay. So somebody asked, are you going to cover row spanning later on today, if you haven't already?
Oh, you mean like column spanning?
Row spanning. I don't know.
Hopefully. I don't think so. I don't think we have a concept of row spanning. We do have column spanning. We have row groups, and we went over that. But there's not so much like hierarchy in the stub as there should be. There's things like you do indents, which is kind of like maybe what you're describing. But essentially, you get one level of row groups, and that is basically it.
All right, and then last one here, and we'll let you go back. It says for formatting, is this allowed? And somebody put like
Yeah,
percentage, 1,000. Should you tackle that one?
I somehow didn't answer that. Maybe I did like my voice. Basically, that's not allowed right now. You can't choose like some sort of like pattern and have that honored. I would do that beforehand, before getting the table into GT, but I think that's something we do want to format, like format with pattern, like FNT pattern.
Yeah.
So Carlos, if you can submit an issue or just, somehow get back to me and I'll make an issue. Because that sounds like a good thing to have, like a really good thing. Great. Okay, so say you want to have multiple currencies. We went through that. You would just choose different currencies. Just to prove that works, I will run this. 2 different columns, 2 different currencies. There we go. It just attaches the symbols and does the right thing. Good. Okay, so that's format currency. You never know when you have to deal with monetary values, so it's a good thing to have. Now we're going to deal with like formatting dates. Right now we have 3 functions: format date, format time, and format date time, and they all format with those types of outputs expected. So let's take a look at our example table, because it does have a date column in there. Now let's use format date on the column date, and we'll choose date style 3. That's what we'll choose. Okay, it doesn't make much sense, but we have a bunch of styles that you can easily format dates with. So let's go to info date style. This is so you don't have to deal with patterns. Later on, we probably want to do the same thing for dates as you might do with numbers. Have like an actual date time pattern you can use. But for now, we have these numbers. There's these presets, these numbered patterns you can use. And this is with this input date, you'll get these out. So we chose 3, and it gives you like this pattern right here, like the short day name, short month, and like the day number and the year. So that's what we get here in date. The only condition is that your date column is formatted as an ISO date. But yeah, if it is, that's great, and it'll work. So we do things here where we can change which rows are accessed or which rows are formatted based on some condition. It's a bit complicated because we have to take the date and then make it as date and then do a comparison. Once we get past that, we can choose different date styles on different rows. And there we have it there. See, it sort of shifts from like this format to this one right here. Great. So we have a similar sort of thing for time. Time is kind of strange that it doesn't have like a real format. Like it's part of the ISO 8601 format. Like it's the time format, but you just need to have it as a string. And should you have it as a string, and we'll see that in the time column, it's right there. We definitely need 24-hour time to make this work. Otherwise, it's a little bit ambiguous. We can choose the time style, and then we could convert it to some other time style. Again, info time style is available. We run that function. We get 5 different patterns we can use, or styles, and this is the way that the formatted time appears in your table. Great. Pretty simple, but you never know when you need to use it, and it makes things nice when you need to use it. I'm going to skip past this and go to date time. And date time is kind of like a combination of both format date and format time. You choose a date style, you choose a time style, they get matched together, and then then you have your formatted date time. Again, the only condition is they have an ISO date time coming in. If you look at this table, it's fulfilled. It's a character class. We're going to improve this later on, so it's more flexible. It chooses, you're allowed to have POSIX and things like that. But right now it's very basic. We just have, it operating on a character based on ISO formats. But if you do have it that way, or can get it in that way, it's pretty good. because you can like flexibly format the date and the time parts separately. Okay, any more questions here? Yeah, great. So yeah, a comment about you could write your own function for formatting. We're not going to get into that because it's a bit more complex for this workshop, but you can use the format function. And the function allows you in its functions argument fns to specify functions based on different output types for what you're going to do with the data. So treating it as like a vector, it's like you basically like pretend you have a vector coming in, and then what are you going to do with it? That's what the function handles, and you're supposed to spit out a vector. A little more complex, but it offers that flexibility to make your own formatter essentially. Okay, so the next function, that's a formatter function I want to show you, is format markdown. It's great if you have markdown inside your cells. So let's make a bunch of vectors with text. So I'll just run this whole thing. Uh-oh, okay, let's try this again. No, okay. I've got some notebook issues here. If I do that, will work, please. No, it could be this. Huh. What's going on there? Okay, let's pretend this works. For some reason, it's not working. But if it did work, you would have like a table with markdown cells. What you would use then is format markdown. You would probably want to format all the columns and all the rows. And then what you get in the end is a table with markdown text that's been translated to the output format that you're targeting. In this case, it's always HTML, but it also works in LaTeX and RTF. So you can have things like more complex markdown, like lists, line breaks, links will be there as well. You can put in little bits of HTML, and some of it will be translated over to other formats as well. Shame you can't see it, but I don't know, never had that problem before, but it's happening. So let's move on to the next function called format missing. So you may have missing values in your table. We definitely have them in Exhibit, these NA values. So what we can do is we can replace those NA values with some other type of text. Basically, it's just replacing, but it's targeting the missing values automatically. So by default, it adds like this triple dash, which actually resolves to an M dash. But you can include any missing text you want. And the cool thing about format missing is you can use it after other formatters and they don't get in the way. Essentially, they only target the NA values. More on that in a second. So if we do that here, we got this table. We have lots of NA values. So for columns 1 and 2, which is num and char, we'll call the missing text. We'll replace the NA values with the word missing. And all the rest of the columns will be NAs becoming nothing. So let's take a look at that. That's what we have here, missing, and then nothing. Great. So that is that. So we can also do it without anything. Let's just try this, just for missing. Because that might be what most people want. Oh, so we got to choose columns. Columns would be everything. There we go. There, in this case, we have just the default dashes, M dashes coming through for the NA values. Great. Any questions about these formatter functions? We're going to get past those. We're moving to data color next. Looks like no, so we'll move on. So data color is a way to automatically set styles. It's like basically like it'll color cells based on their values. So it operates on, I think, both numeric and also like text data as well, because you can format based on factors and things like that. So it's a very complex function in the way you use it, because you actually have to use like scales functions to generate the colors argument. Let's take a look at this table coming in to see what we're looking at. So in this case, you want to color the population according to its number. So as the years go on, the population increases in this case. So we're going to have the palette going from red to blue. So it's going to step through these colors in the range from 2 million to 4 million. Okay, so we're going to do that. Great. So you can see here, blue, we don't really see it because we're not anywhere near 4 million. We're starting off like in orange, typically, like right here. It's not really so red because the population here starts, well beyond 2 million. So we're not hitting the red. If we were to change this a bit, say 2.5 and this to, let's say 3.1, we would definitely be more bounded towards those ranges right there. So basically we're stepping through these colors. These are like sort of like cut points in a way across this domain. So we use functions from scales. If you look in the help for data color, I definitely recommend you look in help for some of these more complicated functions. It gives you some examples. It tells you which functions you can use from scales. Call numeric, call bin, call quantile, call factor. And here's this example, but it gives you more examples there. And more importantly, you want to take a look at the way it's given here. And it even has an example where you can use palettes from Palettier. And it's quite a bit more complex because you have to do a bit of stuff to make that work. But it's nice because you have access to all this huge number of palettes in basically one function call. So that is data color. Let's actually create this pizza place example. So we'll start off with the table itself not being colored by anything. So we have this. So we want to color the sold and income columns. That's what we have here in columns. As far as the colors are concerned, we want to use the call numeric function from scales. And then the palette, we want to grab this palette from Palettier. If you just run this separately in the console, we actually get like an approximation of the colors which are in the palette, which is kind of neat. The thing is, you have to use this as character in the end because palette expects like a character vector, and we don't get that here. So we have to do this. There. That's the only sort of like tricky bit. Maybe we'll make it so palette accepts like this palette object. But today we can't do this. We have to use as character. And in this case, I have domain equal to null. So the domain will just be based on the data itself. It'll just choose the lowest value and the highest value as a domain values. So let's run this whole thing. There, and that's what we get here. We get them scaled separately in their own columns based on this palette here. So separate domains, one domain per column. Great, so that brings us to the end of formatters. So what we covered is tons of stuff, formatting numbers with format number, format integer, scientific, engineering formatters, percentages with format percent, currency values with format currency. A lot of options are common, so you do things like specify your separators, format according to locale, and scale values, apply a pattern, lots of things which are common across those formatters. Dates and times, a little bit underpowered right now in that you have to have character values, which are ISO formatted. But still, that today you can flexibly format as dates, date times, and just times. Unfortunately, the example didn't work for whatever reason in this notebook, but you can take markdown text inside your table and transform them to the output format you expect with format markdown. Missing values, you can handle those with format missing, which is great. because often you don't want to see NA, you want to see something a bit nicer than that. Cells can be colored with data color. And a few times throughout this module, I've shown some info functions. There's a bunch of those. They just provide a nice information table for you for things which are, you may need for reference, like locales, currencies, date and time styles, color palettes, which I didn't show. But they're all there. Okay, second. Yeah.
So you had a comment that you made to someone about styling and color using the column hide operation.
Yeah.
Did you show that by chance?
I did not currently show that, but
do you mind showing it real quick just for the for the video here?
Yeah, certainly. Let me show you a good example. Okay, I'm just trying to find an example which is suitable. I think it might be in the previous. This will be worth it. Trust me, because it's a really good thing to do. Okay, let's just look for tab style. Let's go back. Okay, let's do it here. So say we have this. Yeah, okay, great. This is perfect. So say you just want to show like the green days and the red days. You don't care about the numbers at all. Or say you don't care about the open and close. Let's do that. So let's do calls hide on that. Sorry, this is so small. There we go. Okay. So we'll add that right to the end. Calls hide. And then we choose the columns we want to hide. So do columns equal to, in this case, we just want to, so we're using close and open, but in this case, we'll choose open and close here. We'll hide them. And we just want the highs and lows. So this is kind of cool. So basically you had some like work columns you needed, but you didn't necessarily want to show in the end. You just basically hid them, which is kind of cool. And say, for example, calls hide is actually pretty smart. So you have a footnote on a cell, which is hidden. It will actually, when it generates those footnotes, like it renders them, it'll disregard that footnote and resume the numbering for you. So you don't have to worry about skipped numbers or little things like that. So calls hide is actually quite useful. And what's actually super useful is we'll also have a calls unhide function, because you never know when you might receive an object later on where you want to unhide those columns. You might just say, recreate it, but sometimes you just get an object which has hidden columns. So you might want to unhide. So you can do the same thing. Columns. So now it opens back in its original spot. So you have calls hide, calls unhide. Again, the GT API is pretty flexible. You can put it way up here. Totally fine. Even though you're using columns and you're hiding them, doesn't mean they're not, they're still useful here, even though they're hidden. Because really these are just instructions, and only a few things have an impact in terms of order, like say setting footnotes or new content. But otherwise, you're just setting instructions. And so the order matters less. So that's calls hide. So I'm gonna take that away. Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome. One person said that what they like about GT especially is that you can write your own functions for formatting, and then you can use, bring that in later and pipe it in. Yeah, just mentioning that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And someone mentioned having, like house styles or their own styles for all tables. One thing you might do is you might have like a GT wrapper, like GT styled or something like that. And it just wraps GT, pipes into some other, like tab style functions, or maybe like tab options. And then you just use that at the beginning, because you're just, I kind of wish I could write it here or had an example of it, but just look up like how to write a wrapper function. You just pass in the same arguments to your wrapper function as you do to the GT function. And you should be good to go. You can just incorporate those options right away.
So the one thing I want to mention here too is, in addition to the fact that you can write your own functions, there's also, Rich, help us maybe understand a little bit about like these other packages that sit either kind of on top of GT, like there's, you know, GT extras, there's GT summary. Yeah.
Yeah, so GT extras is fantastic. It adds a lot of stuff that is HTML based, but like tons of flexibility for adding basically prepared HTML content for cells. You can think of, if you're just doing HTML, you've got a lot of freedom because you can treat each of these cells as its own content area. And you can pre-prepare a bunch of HTML for it. And essentially what was done in GT extras is that, like, you know, basically like templating a ton of cool stuff and, you know, popping what you have into those like prepared bits of HTML. And it's great. And there's GT summary, which does a whole different thing. Like it has APIs which handle model output and, you know, makes their own GT tables. I think under the hood, there's still GT tables, so you can apply the same sort of functions that GT has for styling and other things like that. But yeah, there's a few. There's that. There's also model summary, same sort of thing. And I can't recall many others that use GT, although there might be one or two more. But yeah, I totally recommend going that way if you need extra functionality, because they're moving much faster than GT does in terms of like adding extra stuff.
Awesome. Okay. Back to you.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, great. So the next part. So like this whole workshop's been pretty front loaded. The last few sections have less stuff, but pretty important, but we should be able to breeze through it, which is good for half an hour left in this session. So fourth module is about modifying columns. These all begin with calls as a function name, calls underscore. So I do want to get past this somewhat quickly so we can get to the summary rows, which is a bit more important. So, and a lot of stuff is a little bit repetitive. So once we get the concept of what these calls functions do, we can move pretty quickly. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. So calls align, I'm just going to say it. It just sets the alignment of columns, like whole columns. So you can either choose auto alignment based on the content, left, center, and right. Usually auto means numeric values are set to the right, text is set to the left. Only a few things are sent to the center, but there are a few things. And let's take a look at an example here. So we have this table. Great. So now we want to align the column population to the left, which is typically not what we usually have because it's a number value. It's probably gonna be hard to see because there's not much room on the left side, but I assure you, yeah, this is definitely left aligned now. Okay, a little subtle to see, but we can choose country name just so you can see it better and choose right for that. And hopefully we sort of see this a bit better. There we go. So calls align will set the alignment of values in different cells. Good. Calls label. This is an important one because a lot of times you get column labels in your data set, which you don't really want to, you want to make them a bit nicer than what they are in your data. Often a lot nicer. So let's say, for example, we have this country pops data set, which is stripped down to just this table. We just want to capitalize the values you want, or we want to shorten things to name, year, population. We do have a calls label. It's always a little hard to remember how to use calls label. Definitely look at the help, but it's like the column name and then the label you want to apply to the column, right, for each of those columns. So that's how that works. Okay, and you can use Markdown, which is nice because sometimes you want to make them really nice, these columns. So we can do that. And any sort of Markdown you want to put in there, you can do. Great. So that's the column label. So by default, the labels are the column names, but you're essentially changing the column labels to your own label here. So that's how that works. Calls width. Okay. This is how you flexibly set the widths of columns in your table. Well, a lot more complicated because there's a lot to it. Because you can set relative widths and exact widths with pixels, other units too. And this left side, you choose the columns. You can use a tie select helper to choose a bunch of columns that are 100 pixels wide. You can choose the rest, which is everything at the bottom here, to be 60 pixels. Let's see it before and after. So we got this table. It's basically the column widths are fitted to the content by default. Here we're saying we want each column to be exactly these widths. So let's scroll a bit to see it. Because we're saying things are exact, we can even do like really weird things that are almost not allowed, like this. 6 pixels, we can barely see things. It's kind of weird, but maybe you don't have text there, you just have background color. You want to have like a little bit of like color there for a reason to label a row. You know, use imagination. It's possible here. You don't have to have content. Well, the content will be sized exactly. As long as you have pixel values for each of these things, it will do exactly what you say here. Let's set this back to 20. Well, maybe it was more than that. I think it was 60. There we are. Now if we scroll a bit, we get that back to an exact width of 60 pixels. So that's calls width. Calls move. You may want to move columns around. And you may not want to do it before you get the data in. You may want to experiment, move things around. If you move columns around, footnotes that you apply, they'll update. They'll be renumbered and things like that. You don't have to worry about footnote numbering ever. So this is nice. You want to just move things around, and you don't want to always modify the increment table. You want to experiment a bit. So you do let calls move. So in this case, real quick example, population, you want to put that after a country name. So it's shifting over one position. Let's just do it. And there we go. Population is right after country name. Good. Okay, calls hide. I demonstrated this earlier, so I won't get into it again. I won't even show the examples. I'll show the examples. Okay, so we have this table right here. Good, but we don't really want country code 2, country code 3. They're a bit redundant. We could just hide them, and they are gone. Okay, and this is an example because I forgot we had it, where we have this population above 3 million. We want to cover the year based on population, but we don't want to show the population in the end or country code 3. So let's run this. Good. Okay, so what we done was we added a footnote. Sorry about that. So it's not nothing to do styles. So we say here population above 3 million for years 2016, 2017. Population was here on the right, but now it's gone. But the information that it gave us is still lives on as footnotes, as one footnote. Good. Calls merge range. Okay, so we have a set of calls merge functions. They take together 2 or more columns. They mash them together and they auto hide typically the second column. So it's great if you have like a column which is the beginning of a range and another column which is like the end of a range, and you want to make one cell based on that range. So let's take a look at GT cars. We have here miles per gallon, city, highway. Great. So let's merge these together. What you get is that second column goes away, that MPGH. We got this new MPGC column. It's, well, not new, but it's the same column, but the content has been merged between 2 columns. And typically what you do is you want to relabel that because its meaning changed to just MPG. So a good combination is calls merge range plus some labeling. You might label everything anyways, but just saying that, the meaning is a bit different now because 2 columns came together. This is a different implementation of merging. It's with uncertainty. So if you have a value and some uncertainty value, and the separator between as a plus and minus, it gets resolved to a better symbol. But it's currently this is like how you express plus or minus. So let's just quickly show this. We have values in 2 columns. Just pretend that this is an uncertainty value, using currency and num, but just is an example. So we're going to merge these 2 columns together. And now we have this. So if you have an NA on the right side, no uncertainty. If you have an NA on the left side, it's just preserved as NA. There's no NA plus or minus NA. And then because we're doing this, we might relabel it as value plus uncertainty. It's a silly name, but just stating the importance that, you gotta relabel that stuff. Here's another one, calls merge n%. So merge two columns to combine counts and percentages. So this assumes you already have counts and you already have percentages like set up in two columns. So if you do that, the first column is the counts, second column is percentages. Let's take a look at pizza place. Let's get down to the very bottom part where you would do that. It's just before you merge. So we see here we have an n and we have a fraction right there. So now if we do merge, we have this. So the cool thing about this is you can already have like these values formatted. So we're already formatting the n and the percent with format integer, format percent. Those formatted values come together, which is great. And now I'm doing some other sort of fancy stuff to make this table look awesome. There we go. So line breaks. This is like an exercise in line breaks. And oh my God, this is how you would do it with the /n. You would put the two spaces before, not after. I always forget that. That's why I sort of defer to the BR, but you could use this line break symbol. Just remember to put two spaces before that. Yeah, so that's how that works. Okay, so let's move beyond this even. Let's just keep going. That is really it. I'm not going to show the last example because it's a bit redundant, but I want to recap this. Lots of calls underscore functions, things to do: alignment, labeling, width. Typically, these focus on whole columns or like some manipulation of whole columns, like the merging or hiding and moving. So that's this sort of family of functions, calls functions. Okay, now without further ado, I do want to get to summary rows. There's really only two functions in here, summary rows and grand summary rows. There's a difference. Summary rows are group-wise rows. So if you have groups of data, like with row groups, you can create summaries per group. That. If you want a summary that works across the entire table, like takes into account all rows and all groups, you would use grand summary rows. And that is always at the bottom of the table, the very bottom of the table, and set off. So it's actually, this is probably the most complex function in GT. And I would always recommend going to the help for this, just to get an example to start with. Just because it's too much. Like we have to deal with like things like groups, columns, the functions, how to express the functions, missing text, and any additional formatters you want on the actual new values, because we have new values coming in. So you might want to format those. So it's pretty complex. So examples definitely help. And here's an example right here with a figure. So again, all the help in GT, there's examples and there's figures that match the examples. Fortunately, there's no easy way to do it in the R help to have an example plus an image, example, image. So it's like that, best you can do, I suppose. There's one example here, and I believe that's the same example here or something close. Well, not really, but let's take a look at this. This is even simpler. So we have example, and we have some row groups. Good, so we have two groups. So now we want to have summaries in both groups. We want to have a summary that aggregates num in some way, and then a list of the functions. So this is the key thing here. So you can have multiple of these formulas or one-sided formulas. There's an equal sign on the left, and there's a label right here. So sum. Okay, we'll see how this all fits together. I'm just going to run this, and we'll play with the example a bit here. So basically what we have here is we have num has a sum, and in group B, we have to scroll down a bit. We have it there too. Anything that's not, any columns that don't have a summary, just will automatically get this M dash. So this is actually a label. We can capitalize this, and we'll see that comes across here. So we have to put something in here in the stub to identify what this new row is, right? So that's what that is. Good. So this is the simplest example. Let's go to a more complex one. In this case, we'll have this table right here. I'm going to show you the before table. Great. Can make this a bit smaller if you can. Great. So 2 groups, and pretty much starting the same place as before. In this case, we're going to have a few rows in each of the groups. Here we're putting in true. That just means all the groups will have so many rows. Okay, so let's run this. Oops. Great. Group A will have, again, 3 rows, and group B should have the same 3 rows with the same labels and the same source summaries. Good, good, good. Okay. So now we can take that even further, and we can add a formatter to like the new summary rows which are generated. In this case, we want to use format number, and the arguments unfortunately have to be like this for now, like sort of separate. In the ... there's going to be sort of separate arguments and values. So let's run just this part. I'll scroll down, and we see now we have, formatted to 1 decimal place, just like the rows above, which is kind of nice. So they're matching at least. And we can call summary rows again. And we could call all groups. This time we're doing it for a different column for currency. And we have the same aggregate functions here, the same formulas, except in this case we're using the formatter as format currency, and we're choosing a currency and the missing text. Okay, a bit complex, but let's show the values that are generated. So now in this case we have this. We have 2 calls of summary rows. In one case, it's acting on the num column. In another case, it's acting on the currency column. It's different in that the formatter is different. And we actually got rid of those dashes. You may not want those. So you can actually get rid of them with missing text equals nothing. Yeah, in case, too many dashes are just a bit, distracting. Good. Okay, so here's one more example, because you can't have too many examples. Good, good, good. There we are. So we have these. These are already formatted as currency values. We're doing it again. This time we're using a default again for format currency in the summary rows. We have to do it separately because in this case, we're targeting the new rows we generated. Great. A little complex, I have to admit, and we want to definitely improve this a bit, but the help is your friend here in this case. I always look at summary rows, the help documentation before doing any of this stuff, because I always get it wrong. Okay, and we have grand summary rows. So it's just a small difference based compared to before. So let's start with this. We have groups here. We have week 2, week 3. But in this case, we're going to have grand summary rows, which operate on all these columns, but they don't operate on groups. They just operate on all the data. So in this case, we're going to have the min, the max, the mean. And we're going to use the format currency value to format currency function to format all those new rows. And they're going to be at the very bottom, separated by a double line. The labels are in the stub. And yeah, we get those values and they're formatted. And these are really the mean, max, and average per column. So that is summary rows and grand summary rows. And you can style these too. You can use tabstyle and just use cells summary and cells grand summary. And you can access these by the label and the column to do any sort of like text formatting. So that is summary rows. I haven't been looking at the chat, so let me call that up here. It's possible to apply different functions to different variables in the same row. Yeah, it is. You just have to use the rows argument, and then you can target things differently with the formatters, and mostly with the formatters because they take the locations argument. Are there summary columns and grand summary columns? No, unfortunately not. We do want to go this way next time. It'd be great to have like summary columns, obviously. It didn't have like that lower right corner, which, you know, like aggregates everything. But we're not quite there yet. That's definitely a big thing that we do want to put into GT, but it's not there today. Great. We got 10 minutes left. So I'm going to quickly wrap up with just these last few things. This is basically sugar on top. These are these opt functions. They're essentially like wrappers for tab options, but can do things really quickly and really jazz up your table and enable more complicated things to be done with a single function. Okay, so let's run through a bunch of examples because we are pretty low on time. So this is a pretty massive example. I'm just going to show you the table before and after. Right here we have, you know, numbers for footnotes, but we don't want numbers. I mean, there's an option for that. You have to dig through tab options to find it. But if you just want to change the footnote marks, you can use opt footnote marks. And we have a bunch of options here. In this case, we use standard as a keyword. That's a standard set. There's also, like I showed you before, there's letters, which works. And by extension, you can use letters, uppercase, and, you know, other things. I would definitely look at the help again for opt footnote marks, and you see all the different options for marks, including more manual options. But that's yeah, that's one thing you can do to have a shorthand. Opt row striping. There's an option to add or remove row striping. Originally GT, like rows were striped by default, and you could, you know, disable that. That was totally changed well, quite a while back. So now rows by default don't have any zebra stripes, but you could include them with opt row striping. And it's a bit subtle, but you see, like, you know, this row and this row has striping. And I believe the case is that some of your rows don't have that. You have to do it yourself, just because you just want to stripe the body. Okay, another one is opt align table header. I mean, by default, the table heading, like the title and subtitle, are centered, but it could be left aligned and it will look really nice. So let's take a look at this whole thing. I'm just going to say we're going to left align the title of the table and the table subtitle. Yeah, I mean, it's not too bad. I mean, you can always inject a little bit of space if it's too far to the left, but if you already have it like in a page, it's going to look, you know, pretty good. Opt all caps. Here's a very opinionated one in case you want to have like the table chrome around the body cells to be like more in caps. So in this case, you can choose locations like columns, labels, stub, row group to have this, you know, all capitalization look. So let's just show you before and after, because that's usually more striking if you see it that way. So this is a standard table we're going to use, and we're going to apply this function, all caps. Yeah, in this case, we're really differentiating the look of like the headings and like the row labels. We're bolding the text, we're shrinking on the size a little bit, and we're putting them all in capitals. So that's how that is. Okay, great. Opt table lines. This is interesting. Like by default, we have a bunch of lines in the table set for you, but you can get rid of them all, or you can have the maximum set of lines in, or go back to the default. The reason you do this is because you may just want to add your own lines, and you want to start, you know, in a situation where you have all the lines, or you want to be super minimal and start with, you know, no lines. So let's run this. By default, it gives you all the table lines, but you can choose extent. What was it? None, I believe. And then have no table lines at all. And then, you know, you can DIY your own lines in there. And sometimes you just want this for like simple tables where you just want to have content areas and you want to, you know, just lay out certain things and just have text. And maybe it's a good solution for certain documents. Opt table outline. So you can wrap an outline around the entire label, an entire table with this. So let's show you that very quickly. Just going to show you this example before. Okay, this is gonna be a little hard to see because of the border. But if you look really closely, you can see the table line is there on the outside, wraps around, and you can set options. You can change the color, it could be red. Looks kind of cool, actually. So that's table line, opt table line, table outline. There's more. Leaving us the best to last, opt table font. You can opt, there's an option to define a custom font for the entire table. And you can choose a Google font and have some fallbacks right here. These are system fonts in case you're offline. This is using Meriwether from the Google Fonts service. And yeah, again, if you're offline, it'll just go into Cochin or Serif. Here. So I'm just showing here that you can choose system fonts. And there's also a default fonts vector that you can just use. I'll show you that in the console. It's just like a vector of fonts that will work across most systems, including like Linux systems as well. Great.
All right.
I think that's it. I'm going to stop you here. This is much too complex to really get into, and yeah, it's interesting. But I think I'll leave it for questions and wrap up right now.
I was going to mention, Rich, there's a few questions that have come in. I'm not sure which ones you tackled, so I'll just kind of start at the first one. It says, most of these functions are at the presentation level, such that renaming your column using columns label is not the same as deploy or rename, for example.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
it's very true. You're taking your sort of like dplyr table, which is in a good state, close to presentation. And you could present that. You don't have to do anything, and it's already in the format you need. But sometimes you do want to clean things up, add line breaks. You want to have it sort of, like you want to nice it up, I suppose, for presentation. So a lot of these are very presentational, sort of like things you can do. It's really just to create camera-ready tables. The tables will look nice and convey information in the way you want it to be conveyed.
All right. And it says, is it possible to apply different functions to different variables in the same row?
Oh, in the same row. Oh, I see, across, like going across. Yeah, you would have to do columns like everything, and then choose rows, and then either an index if you don't have a stub, or some select helper based on a stub value. So it could be like 3. If you want to, format everything in row 3, it would just be like rows equals 3, and then apply some function there. So it's definitely possible. And we've seen that with like the S&P 500 table. You're just applying like the same thing on certain rows across all columns.
So I got a few more I'm going to tackle pretty quick just as time's running out. So the next one is, are there differences between summary columns and grand summary columns?
Well, I see what you mean. Like if you had like, if you were actually implement those functions, like, and actually, if they existed, there probably would be a difference. Yeah, you might have like columns and spanners, and they would form a group. And then you would want like a summary for that, a column summary for that group. But then at the very end, you may want to have, considering all groups which have spanners, you may want to just have like a grand summary column. So if they do exist, they probably exist in that way. So instead of going like in the Y direction, you're going in the X direction, really.
Then we got one last question. We're going to wrap up here. It says, is there an obvious added value of using summary rows and grand summary rows at reporting level instead of dealing with this when creating your data frame before the reporting step? I think you kind of tackled that one, but.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard to aggregate and then like put the rows in the exact order you need them in. Like before you bring it to GT, like in dplyr, for instance. So manipulation of rows, ordering of rows can be difficult unless you have like, unless you do lots of like, upfront stuff to prepare your row ordering. And also there's like the situation where, rows are reordered in GT automatically. So sometimes if you order things in the exact way you want it, it could get wrecked by GT. And then like your summary rows coming in are actually somewhere where you don't want them to be. if you're doing the GT API and create your summary rows there, at least you know they're going to be in the right place. Yeah, so it seems easier, but you have to deal with the cost of dealing with the summary rows function.
Right. Okay. So to keep us on time here, thank you, everybody. I want to mention, I just put a link from the workshop last year that somebody created noted issues from our Pharma Workshop. Rich is very open to feedback and thoughts, and we want to make sure that this package is a great one for the community. If anybody wants to create a page for this year, if you have thoughts or comments or questions you want to feedback to give back to Rich, doing so on the GT GitHub page is a great way to do that. You don't have to piggyback off of last year's, but I just wanted to give that to you as an example of what they did last year. With that, we can go ahead and let everybody get going with their afternoon. We do have a workshop this afternoon with the Merck team. And then if you want to listen more about Rich and GT, come to the keynote, obviously, on Tuesday morning next week at the RN Pharma conference. And with that, I want to thank you so much, Rich. 2 years in a row is obviously such a huge part of the conference, and we appreciate it so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming, and we will go ahead and wrap things up.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That was great.